It was precisely 41 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, on the 7th day of February, in the year 2026, that the ambient climate along the prestigious stretch of North Rodeo Drive underwent a transformation so sudden and so profound it felt like the very air had been rewired, abruptly abandoning its customary veneer of muted, understated grandeur for an atmosphere thick with a palpable, high-voltage tension. Into this charged environment stepped the celebrated figure of Meghan Markle, effectively rendering herself an enigma by hiding behind a pair of enormous, darkly tinted lenses and being entirely swathed in a bespoke cape coat of the purest ivory hue, an ensemble that seemed to actively emanate an aura of hushed, ineffable wealth as she proceeded with measured steps toward the flagship Chanel boutique in Beverly Hills. Her progress was marked by the kind of calculated, innate elegance belonging only to those individuals who fully expect that every single portal and entranceway will be swung wide open in deference long before they even draw near the polished threshold. She was mentally braced, entirely prepared for the predictable, meticulously choreographed routines associated with elite, high-end commerce. The soft, deferential murmur of a welcome, the swift and silent escort into a private, secluded shopping chamber, and the singular, undivided, and utterly reverential attention of a senior executive from the establishment. Yet, the reception that greeted her arrival proved to be an impenetrable barrier, one seemingly without any parallel in the recent history of such high-profile interactions. Standing directly between her and the famous, revered glass doors bearing the iconic, interlocking double C emblem were two imposing security personnel, positioned with a stillness so absolute and an immovability so complete it suggested they might have been hewn directly from solid granite. There was no hint of a welcoming smile to be observed, nor was there any semblance of the frantic, immediate mobilization one would expect, no hurried summoning of a floor manager or personal shopper to attend to her presence. One of these steadfast sentinels, a man who had assuredly observed countless famous personalities pass through that very entry over the years, did nothing more than meet her expectant gaze and articulate precisely 10 carefully chosen words that were destined, in the very near future, to send reverberations of shock throughout the established foundations of the global garment trade. "We have been instructed not to accommodate you at this time." For a personality who had, until this moment, been widely lauded and celebrated as the very embodiment of the quintessential contemporary inspiration for venerable heritage luxury labels, this represented nothing less than a breathtaking, public and utterly undeniable reversal of fortune and standing. This particular occurrence was demonstrably far removed from being a simple clerical error or a minor lapse in scheduling communications. It certainly was not attributable to some trivial conflict concerning a misplaced calendar appointment, nor could it be dismissed as the simple fact that the establishment was temporarily closed for a private, unannounced function. Instead, this cold reality represented the full and final execution of a conscious, definitive, and internationally disseminated directive that had flowed directly downward from the central, powerful corporate offices of Chanel, situated in their historic location on Rue Cambon in Paris. This was a resolution so exceptionally rare and so utterly comprehensive that even those privileged individuals residing within the most inner sanctum of the fashion house spoke of it only in hushed tones, referring to it euphemistically as the nuclear option. Within the intensely high-stakes, coded lexicon of the venerable house of Chanel, this action transcended a mere denial of entry. It was, in effect, an act of complete and total institutional erasure. The ongoing narrative surrounding this dramatic turn of events was clearly developing, and interested parties were strongly encouraged to subscribe to the relevant channels to ensure they remained fully updated on every development in this unfolding fashion drama. A considerable crowd of onlookers, including several attentive employees from the neighboring Dior establishment, bore silent witness as the Duchess appeared to undergo an immediate, visible petrification, seeming to turn to something as cold and unyielding as ice. Her delicate fingers remained tightly clenched around her mobile communication device, frozen mid-composition of what was likely an urgent message, while her entire physical frame became rigidly still under the unrelenting intensity of the bright California sun. For a span of several drawn-out moments, the silence that descended upon the scene was absolutely piercing in its intensity. Then, slowly, the carefully maintained composure began the process of dissolution. Eyewitnesses present at the location later recounted observing her commencing a restless, mechanical pacing back and forth, moving with the jerky, programmed motions of a delicate clockwork doll, her vocal projections steadily increasing in volume as she initiated a desperate, highly charged telephone call intended for Prince Harry. One specific bystander offered a vivid recollection of hearing her voice elevated to a shout into the receiver, vehemently vowing that certain unnamed individuals would swiftly face termination of their employment and passionately asserting with great vehemence that no person possessed the legitimate authority to subject her to such public and profound degradation. In a span of time equivalent to precisely 20 minutes, Harry arrived at the designated location. His facial color utterly leached away, leaving his countenance pale, and his lower jaw held rigidly in a line indicative of intense tension and restraint. He made an earnest endeavor to initiate a meaningful exchange of words with the security chief, to enter into a dialogue, but the man offered absolutely nothing in response save for a single, unwavering, and completely resolute downward movement of his head, a firm shake signifying absolute refusal. There would be absolutely no allowance for any deviation, no exceptions permitted from the established protocol whatsoever. This strict adherence would hold true not for a duke, nor for a duchess, and most assuredly not for any other individual who might present themselves. As the digital lenses belonging to three separate, observing individuals began their work, diligently capturing and documenting those 12 minutes that constituted a period of public social isolation, the wider populace started to slowly comprehend a starkly different reality. The elegant, velvet cord that once symbolized access had not simply been drawn closed. Rather, it had been charged intensely, surging with an almost palpable, high-voltage electrical current. Concealed behind the carefully managed facade of public awareness, a truly extensive and detailed file had been painstakingly compiled over a considerable period, and the esteemed president of the fashion division, whose name is Bruno Pavlovsky, had already affixed his official signature to the final, irrevocable decree. This moment signified the definite commencement of the absolute and ultimate conclusion of Meghan Markle's connections and affiliations with the most select and rarefied societal strata of the Parisian elite. The entrance to that sacred, inner sanctuary had been firmly bolted and secured against further entry, and for the very first time across a span of several intervening years, the narrative surrounding these events was no longer being authored or controlled by her own hand or influence. The public degradation that was so visibly enacted upon North Rodeo Drive represented nothing more than the surface-level tremor, the perceptible vibration resulting from a far grander, massive tectonic shift that had actually taken place many months earlier, deep within the heavy, stone-walled administrative corridors of the French establishment. To truly and completely grasp the underlying reasons why the most storied and historically significant fashion institution upon the entire planet elected to subject a duchess to such a visibly harsh form of censure and humiliation, it becomes necessary to peer into the closely guarded, top-secret archives of the internal brand integrity unit operating within the esteemed house of Chanel. Hidden from the general view, this calculated decision was anything but erratic or impulsive. It was, in fact, the carefully determined end result stemming from a dossier so extraordinarily voluminous and so potentially catastrophic in its implications that those few individuals privy to its contents internally had assigned it the weighty, ominous designation of the nuclear file. It is strongly recommended that interested parties subscribe to this channel in order to gain access to further, more comprehensive analyses and deep investigations into the secret files maintained by various luxury brands. The critical fracture, the point where the relationship began to widen in a seriously damaging fashion, first made itself profoundly felt 14 full months preceding the tense standoff that occurred in Beverly Hills, specifically on the 5th day of December in the year 2024. On that day, Meghan had made an appearance at the Chanel workshop situated in Paris under the deceptive appearance of an intimate, private tour intended to investigate what her own representatives described as a cultural partnership. Nevertheless, according to the testimonies provided by 4 former employees who were present on the premises during that specific day, the atmosphere within the room rapidly descended into an intensely freezing coldness within the space of mere minutes. Meghan did not enter the premises in the capacity of a valued patron or a welcomed guest of the venerable institution. Instead, she conducted herself with an air that suggested she believed herself to be the newly appointed creative director, taking charge. Sources close to the matter indicate that she displayed an unyielding insistence upon gaining access to view the secret design blueprints specifically prepared for the forthcoming 2025 Métiers d'Art collection, a level of privilege that is almost never, under any circumstances, extended to any individual situated outside the confines of the company itself. When the appointed curators of the precious archives began to exhibit understandable signs of hesitation and reluctance to comply, she reportedly commenced issuing a series of unsolicited, authoritative commands. She offered the unsolicited counsel that the esteemed fashion house ought to immediately divest itself of what she critically characterized as its inherent French rigidity, in order to achieve a more resonant connection with a supposed modern and compassionate public. In what proved to be the most jarring and offensive turn of events during that entire visit, she allegedly put forth a direct petition for a specific type of silk decorative border, a delicate element of design, to be officially renamed in her personal honor, thereby suggesting that her own individual identity was the single, vital component that had been conspicuously missing from the venerable, century-old heritage of Chanel. One employee, who understandably requested complete anonymity for their testimony, recalled with perfect clarity the exact second when the entirety of the room descended into a profound, dead silence. She completely failed to grasp the fundamental reality that Chanel does not exist as a mere nursery or playground for the overgrown egos of famous individuals. It is, instead, a genuine cathedral dedicated to the highest forms of style, and within the sacred confines of a cathedral, one does not presume to instruct the established clergy on the proper, established manner in which to conduct the sacred liturgy. This particular visit, which was supposed to be a simple tour, ultimately served as the definitive breaking point in a protracted pattern of conduct that had been systematically recorded by various parties since the earliest months of 2023. The comprehensive collection of evidence scrutinized by the highest levels of the board of directors included a sequence of electronically intercepted messages in which the official representatives acting on Meghan's behalf were strenuously insisting upon receiving formal co-creative credit for an entire collection of handbags that was intended for restricted release. Their demands were not merely seeking a simple, collaborative arrangement. They were actively demanding a seat at the very most exclusive table, the one currently occupied by the esteemed members of the Wertheimer family themselves. As the final days of the month of December in the year 2024 were drawing to a close, a momentous decree, which translated precisely to a retrait definitif, or, in its full and weighty meaning, a permanent withdrawal, received its formal authorization, this pivotal sanction being issued by the esteemed Bruno Pavlovsky, who presides as the president over the entire fashion division of the venerable house of Chanel. This particular regulatory measure stands as the most stringent and severe tactic that remains within the brand's comprehensive arsenal, reserved exclusively for those unfortunate souls who are deemed, after due consideration, to have grievously betrayed the intellectual trust and confidence held sacred by the house, or for those whose very presence might introduce what the institution labels as a risk of public relations pollution. The directive itself was absolute in its finality and all-encompassing in its reach. It mandated a complete cessation of all forms of access, prohibiting any and all admittance to events, vetoing any future bookings, forbidding the borrowing of any merchandise whatsoever, and, perhaps most critically of all, enforcing an absolute prohibition on any public association or link of any conceivable kind. The repercussions of this severe judgment began to manifest themselves with immediate effect, even though, at the outset, these consequences were handled with considerable discretion and quietude. Swiftly, the distinguished name of the Duchess was meticulously erased from the official roster of invitees slated to attend the forthcoming major exhibition scheduled to take place in the city of Manchester. Across the various international regions, management personnel received an explicit communication designated as a Level 1 non-engagement directive, a formal designation that unequivocally characterized her status as persona non grata across every single global territory under Chanel's purview. While the wider general public continued to observe images of a duchess elegantly adorned in the finest high-fashion creations, the true arbiters and elite within the industry were, in reality, witnessing the methodical, almost surgical deletion of a prominent woman from the very ledgers and annals of the fashion world's esteemed society. Behind the closed doors of executive meetings, the preferred vernacular used to categorize her precarious standing became the stark phrase, tactically uninsurable. This drastic measure was far more than a simple, knee-jerk reaction to a mere litany of demands she had presented. Rather, it represented a profound institutional response to the volatile unpredictability she inherently introduced into a rarefied sphere that, above all else, demands and thrives upon the stable currency of absolute consistency and unwavering caution. The leadership at Chanel had, over time, arrived at the profound realization that every single occasion upon which Meghan Markle entered a given venue or space, the entire focus of the ensuing discourse invariably ceased to revolve around the celebrated artistry, the meticulous craftsmanship, or the exquisite garments themselves. Instead, the entire narrative inexorably and entirely pivoted to become solely about her persona. For a fashion house that has successfully navigated the tumultuous waters of two devastating global conflicts and countless seismic economic shifts, precisely by maintaining a resolute posture above the incessant clamor and noise, the specific brand of high-velocity, viral controversy so often associated with Meghan was perceived as an existential and potentially fatal danger to the very bedrock of their corporate honor and reputation. Consequently, the highly publicized confrontation that occurred in the sophisticated surroundings of Beverly Hills on the 7th day of the month of February in the year 2026 was not the accidental blunder of some low-ranking, inexperienced security officer on duty. No, it was, in fact, the public execution of a definitive sentence that had been formally handed down a full year before that very date, deep within the strategic heart of the French capital. The locks had already been engaged with finality, the internal bolts secured with unyielding force, and for the inaugural time in the entirety of her celebrated life, the Duchess encountered an imposing threshold that no degree of inherited royal status or her formidable command over the media apparatus could possibly hope to unlatch or overcome. And as this unfolding drama continues to captivate many, one should certainly not neglect the crucial reminder to subscribe to the channel so that one never misses a single critical moment of this high-stakes, ongoing narrative as it develops. That very public clash witnessed on the famous thoroughfare of Rodeo Drive served as the final explosive flare, but the true ignition of the fuse had actually occurred 3 long years earlier, during a specific span of months that is now referenced in the most hushed tones within the exclusive fashion hubs of both Paris and New York as the infamous Mood Board War. This period represented several challenging months situated squarely in the middle of the year 2023, a time when the grand, ambitious designs conceived by the Duchess of Sussex clashed headlong and without compromise against the impenetrable historical bulwark that constitutes Chanel's enduring legacy. This entire episode proved to be significantly more consequential than a mere, passing dispute over aesthetic preferences or visual styling. It crystallized into a fundamental conflict between two diametrically opposed ideologies concerning the nature and deployment of influence. It was specifically in the month of May of the year 2023 that the official business counselor for Meghan at the Archwell organization, a representative named Vanessa Lauren, initiated the crucial first dialogue with the United States media office maintained by Chanel. The designated intermediary tasked with bridging this gap was Zara Carmichael, an individual who brought with her a considerable reputation as a former public relations specialist for Goop, known for her exceptional skill in successfully facilitating high-profile agreements between prominent figures of Hollywood and the most prestigious European luxury houses. The essence of the pitch presented was exceptionally audacious and remarkably bold. The proposition centered on creating a strictly limited-run philanthropic collection to be titled Archwell x Chanel. The comprehensive proposal passionately advocated for a deliberate and synergistic fusion between the transformative, enduring legacy established by the iconic Coco Chanel and the contemporary, purpose-driven branding strategy championed by Meghan. The intricate details gleaned from internal records, painstakingly recovered from a digital repository that had, unfortunately, succumbed to unauthorized access, a compromised server belonging to a notably prominent public relations agency, revealed that the initial outward manifestation of the response emanating from Chanel was one steeped in a refined, exceedingly sophisticated, and characteristically French style of polite deference. However, when one peered behind this carefully constructed facade, examining the internal commentary generated during that very first exploratory discussion, the language employed was markedly, and significantly, more candid and forthright in its assessment. Indeed, one influential figure holding a senior leadership position within the esteemed house characterized the posture adopted by the personnel representing Archwell as decidedly overstepping the established boundaries, and further noted that it was demonstrating an undeniable and palpable lack of the requisite respect for the venerable, century-old architectural foundation upon which this brand has been built. Notwithstanding these nuanced, almost subtle cautionary signals that were being transmitted, a formal and highly anticipated presentation was meticulously scheduled to take place on the 14th day of June, in the year 2023, Within the confines of an intentionally secluded meeting chamber affording picturesque vistas overlooking the expanse of Central Park in the bustling metropolis of New York City. That particular assemblage, that singular gathering, would subsequently be indelibly etched into the collective annals of the world of high fashion as the precise juncture at which the nascent connection between the two entities began its catastrophic trajectory toward complete and utter incineration. Upon entering the room, Meghan presented a meticulously prepared digital slide deck, the title of which, emblazoned on the screen, boldly proclaimed, "Reimagine Chanel, from exclusivity to empathy." To the seasoned executives seated arrayed on the opposing side of the substantial conference table, this title alone was instantly perceived, not merely as a suggestion, but as a direct and deliberate affront to their core philosophy. The entirety of the meticulously constructed financial framework that underpins Chanel's enduring success is fundamentally and inextricably founded upon the very concept of absolute exclusivity. Consequently, the very notion of employing the abstract concept of empathy as a primary marketing instrument was immediately and negatively regarded as nothing less than a dilution, a calculated watering down, of the institution's carefully cultivated and highly guarded aura of prestige. According to the accounts provided by 3 separate individuals who were present within the intimate setting of that room, the ensuing presentation was comprised not of tentative ideas, but rather of a relentless string of what were perceived as extreme and non-negotiable requirements, which were, unfortunately, framed under the guise of constructive creative input. Meghan, in her proposal, championed a series of luxurious silk garments wherein the instantly recognizable, legendary double C insignia would either be entirely excised from the design or, alternatively, be forced into a visual pairing with a delicate, subtly rendered floral motif, specifically intended to serve as a symbolic representation of Archwell. She argued with conviction that the venerable label was urgently in need of a profound transformation in order to successfully capture the attention and loyalty of a younger and significantly more socially conscious cohort of global consumers. Whispers circulating later suggested that the palpable tension within the space reached its absolute breaking point when the discourse inevitably shifted toward a proposed collection of accessories, specifically a line of environmentally conscious handbags. Meghan put forth the audacious suggestion that the flagship item within this entire forthcoming collection should be christened with the profoundly evocative name, the Diana, when a legal representative acting on behalf of Chanel, displaying impeccable professional composure, politely yet firmly inquired as to whether the necessary formal consent had been secured from either the estate of the Spencers or the esteemed royal collection to authorize the utilization of the revered name of Princess Diana for the purposes of a commercial, for-profit fashion enterprise. Meghan reportedly leaned forward with pronounced intensity and delivered a response that carried significant emotional weight, stating unequivocally, "I carry her legacy deep within my very soul. I do not require any form of official permit in order to offer a heartfelt tribute to my own mother-in-law." A profound, almost suffocating, silence descended upon the room, hanging heavy in the air. One attendee later recalled, with evident lingering astonishment, that the assembled Chanel team exhibited visible reactions suggesting they had just borne witness to an act of profound religious desecration. Within the rarefied atmosphere of French haute couture, tradition is not some malleable element to be casually reworked or strategically repurposed for the sake of a fleeting news release. Rather, it is considered a sacred, inviolable obligation. Should the unfolding narrative of these extraordinary events prove as utterly gripping to you as it has proven to us, we implore you to immediately subscribe to this channel to ensure you miss no further developments. The precarious circumstances rapidly deteriorated, transforming from what began as a private, high-stakes clash of wills into a full-blown organizational emergency a mere 7 days later. In the latter part of June, in the year 2023, a carefully curated collection of inspirational photographic materials, allegedly conceived and executed by the design team affiliated with Archwell, was surreptitiously leaked onto a highly restricted, invitation-only fashion message board. This illicit dissemination was swiftly followed by its subsequent capture and proliferation across several anonymous gossip websites that thrive on such clandestine information. The disseminated material featured historic, archival photographs depicting Princess Diana elegantly attired in iconic Chanel ensembles, which had been digitally superimposed with strikingly monochromatic images showing Meghan replicating those very same poses and stances. The overarching caption accompanying this evocative visual pairing declared with dramatic flair, from grief to glamour, the heirloom line. For the legal department situated on the illustrious Rue Cambon, this unauthorized leak served as the unimpeachable, definitive evidence confirming their suspicions of profound wrongdoing. It communicated with unmistakable clarity that Meghan's objective was not the pursuit of a genuine, mutually beneficial creative collaboration, but rather the acquisition of a strategic tool intended to rewrite her personal narrative by employing the storied history and established prestige of the House of Chanel as an utterly self-serving backdrop. Consequently, an internal ethical alarm, a significant red flag, was instantaneously triggered within the corporation's highest echelons. The subsequent internal communication, meticulously composed entirely in the French language and formally disseminated to the esteemed board of directors, asserted with unwavering conviction: this sequence of actions does not, under any circumstances, constitute brand synergy. What we are observing here is a calculated and deliberate attempt at the misappropriation of a globally recognized and respected brand. This individual is evidently seeking to utilize this historic fashion house as an impenetrable shield against ongoing, personal controversy. On the 26th day of June, in the year 2023, a session of utmost gravity was hastily assembled within the historic confines of Paris, a city synonymous with the very pinnacle of style and artistry. This period of intense deliberation culminated swiftly, for by the time the first day of July arrived, the provisional decision reached during those charged discussions had been formally rendered permanent and unalterable. A directive, stark and absolute in its prohibition, known internally as a no-go order, was dispatched to every single regional supervisor overseeing any aspect related to the ambitious Archwell undertaking. The instructions were unequivocal. All avenues of communication, every channel of interaction, and any form of professional engagement were mandated to cease immediately, without the slightest delay or preamble. There would be no carefully worded, official communication detailing the rejection, no prepared statement issued to the press to manage the narrative, and absolutely no public declaration whatsoever to acknowledge the cessation of the endeavor. Within the rarefied and often ruthless sphere of high fashion, the most chillingly effective mechanism for ensuring the demise of any promising venture is achieved not through dramatic confrontation, but by the deliberate, calculated starvation of its essential sustenance, the very oxygen of sustained attention and acknowledgement. Consequently, the entire ambitious project simply withered away into an absolute, profound silence, fading from view without so much as a whisper of its passing. However, the repercussions emanating from this abrupt cessation were anything but silent or unseen behind the velvet ropes and closed doors of the inner circles. Associates and confidants situated near the Duchess began to suggest, with increasing certainty, that her personal interpretation of this professional withdrawal was far removed from being categorized as a mere commercial realignment or a simple business decision. Rather, it was perceived by her quite keenly as a deliberate and deeply personal affront. Subsequently, in a series of electronic missives that eventually surfaced into the public domain through what was described as a clandestine and unauthorized disclosure, the Duchess reportedly conveyed her raw feelings to an individual in whom she placed profound trust, stating something to the effect of, "They expertly leveraged my established reputation to generate considerable buzz and excitement during their private planning sessions, only to slam the door shut the very moment they felt they had successfully extracted the desired intelligence. I assure you, I shall ascend beyond their limited scope and influence. That is something I invariably achieve." By the time the season of spring in the year 2024 had fully blossomed, the transformation in the Duchess's public presentation was unmistakably apparent to those perceptive individuals who possessed the necessary context to recognize the subtle shifts in her presentation. Meghan began a meticulous and systematic process of excising every single reference to the esteemed House of Chanel from her public discourses and planned appearances. The established hallmarks of her wardrobe, the classic ballet slippers and the instantly recognizable quilted leather purses, were unceremoniously retired, replaced instead by selections drawn from the collections of Valentino, Carolina Herrera, and Self-Portrait, a trinity of design houses believed, at that juncture, to be significantly more receptive to the potent synergy between established celebrity influence and the swiftly moving currents of modern branding apparatuses. A former specialist who provided brief, high-level consultation on the Duchess's wardrobe for a prominent endeavor involving streaming services recalled vividly that the Duchess developed a distinct preoccupation with overtly demonstrating a complete and utter lack of reliance upon the Parisian elite. She was frequently observed posing pointed inquiries, such as, "Does this particular ensemble convey an adequate degree of French sophistication to truly make the necessary impact?" It became manifestly clear that the motivation driving these choices had transcended mere questions of visual aesthetics. It had morphed into a focused quest for tangible vindication, sought through the very medium of her visible representation. Nevertheless, this escalating confrontation, which some observers privately dubbed the mood board war, inadvertently instigated a secondary, unforeseen consequence that the strategists surrounding Meghan had evidently failed to anticipate in their maneuvering. The entire ecosystem of the world of high fashion constitutes an astonishingly small, yet intricately interconnected community where information, regardless of how sensitive, tends to traverse the globe with astonishing velocity. The anecdotal account concerning the specific Diana handbag and the concerted, internal effort to clandestinely substitute the iconic double C insignia traveled with the speed of an untamed wildfire directly through the executive boardrooms of the colossal LVMH and Kering conglomerates. The impact was far broader than a mere snub from one prestigious establishment. It effectively resulted in the entire upper echelon of European luxury goods silently closing ranks. By the commencement of the 2025 fashion season, the Duchess discovered herself navigating an increasingly precarious and unstable professional landscape. Her considerable fame had been fundamentally predicated upon an association with high-profile visibility within an industry that was rapidly pivoting its focus toward the understated elegance of quiet luxury and the deeply rooted aesthetics of inherited wealth, precisely the established paradigms she had so vigorously endeavored to disrupt and challenge. The brief, measured span of 12 minutes of profound silence observed at the particular establishment located in Beverly Hills during the year 2026 served as the definitive final punctuation mark upon a lengthy and complex narrative that had effectively been composed during those highly charged, friction-filled strategic sessions held in 2023. Chanel, having observed the entire sequence of events with remarkable patience and calculated restraint, had ultimately decided upon its decisive course of action. They had delivered an undeniable demonstration that while a globally recognized personality might possess the fleeting power to command a headline, an established, enduring fashion house inherently commands the very threshold of entry into that world. The turbulent and highly publicized moodboard war had finally reached its inevitable conclusion, and in this particular conflict, the Duchess had not only failed to secure a victory but had, in the eyes of the industry's gatekeepers, been effectively and completely erased from the map of possibility. The hallowed and often opaque corridors of Parisian high fashion, those avenues where influence is measured not by clamor but by carefully cultivated silence, are typically plated in the exquisite, burnished gold of utmost discretion. Yet, when the most powerful figures within those gilded spaces choose to turn their backs, that very quietude assumes a gravity far exceeding the resonance of any overt declaration or grand gesture. This shared silence functions, effectively, as a total and comprehensive cancellation of an individual's personal brand equity within the ecosystem. In the immediate aftermath of that very public and visible moment of rejection observed at the esteemed Chanel boutique situated in Beverly Hills, there followed a subtle yet perfectly synchronized withdrawal across the most significant and influential fashion bodies operating throughout France. From the exclusive, richly appointed boutiques lining the famous Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré to the sumptuously appointed executive offices offering panoramic views across the magnificent Place Vendôme, the collective leadership arrived at a singular, almost chillingly unanimous consensus. The Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, was henceforth to be regarded as an unwelcome presence within the refined confines of this trade, a figure deemed an undeniable liability. For those who wish to remain meticulously informed regarding the swift and often tectonic shifts occurring within the world of haute couture and luxury commerce, a subscription to the appropriate channels is strongly recommended. According to highly sensitive, top-secret intelligence that was procured from an individual holding a very senior position within the fashion hierarchy, a crucial, confidential meeting of the industry's paramount leaders convened precisely on the 9th day of February, in the year 2026. This pivotal session was skillfully presided over by a genuinely major figurehead who holds considerable sway within the venerable Comite Colbert, that prestigious and powerful organization which speaks authoritatively for the collective interests of France's most legendary and enduring luxury labels. The attendance roster for this high-level gathering read like a veritable roll call of the masters of global wealth and creative direction. There were esteemed envoys representing the colossal LVMH conglomerate, the parent entity responsible for celebrated houses such as Dior, Givenchy, and Louis Vuitton, as well as representatives from the Kering Group, the formidable owners of Balenciaga, Saint Laurent, and Bottega Veneta, and, naturally, the privately held titan that is Chanel itself. While it is entirely understandable that no official public records of such a sensitive meeting were ever made available for general perusal, a leaked overview of the private dialogue that transpired reveals a cold, almost surgically precise accuracy in the shared strategic approach adopted by these titans. The fundamental verdict delivered during that closed-door discussion was entirely transparent in its clarity. Effective immediately and until any such time as circumstances might drastically alter, the Duchess of Sussex was to be systematically purged from all primary invitation lists for exclusive events, scrubbed from showroom entry logs reserved for VIPs, and meticulously removed from all spreadsheets detailing active or prospective influencer partnerships. The internal justification for this drastic measure was formally categorized under the chillingly sterile designation of a public relations contamination risk. Within the rarefied sphere of high-level commerce, where the slightest ripple of viral negative news possesses the instantaneous power to strip away intrinsic value from a reputation painstakingly constructed over the span of 100 years or more, the disruptive and far-reaching fame associated with Meghan was perceived as an active contagion that this venerable industry was no longer prepared, nor willing, to accommodate or shelter any longer. Even though the House of Chanel had been the initial entity to take decisive action, executing its policy shift in the most overtly visible manner, the remaining major luxury brands demonstrated remarkable speed in solidifying this newly established boundary. Dior, an institution steeped in history that had long been the subject of persistent, circulating rumors regarding a potential major, high-profile partnership with Meghan, swiftly disseminated a quiet but utterly firm internal memorandum to all of its worldwide media and public relations teams. The instruction contained within this directive was uncomplicated in its execution. Cease immediately the practice of providing garments for any of her forthcoming public appearances and terminate all ongoing interactions, direct or indirect, with the talent agents who currently represent the Sussex household's professional interests. Even Givenchy, the esteemed fashion house responsible for crafting the memorably beautiful bridal gown worn by Meghan in the year 2018 under the creative stewardship of Claire Waite-Keller, opted decisively for a strategy characterized by complete and utter separation from the ongoing narrative. While they consciously elected to refrain from issuing any form of public statement or commentary whatsoever, an individual possessing intimate knowledge of the current design staff verified the profound shift in institutional attitude, noting, "Our creative focus is resolutely fixed upon cultivating new talent and celebrating enduring artistry, not becoming entangled in ongoing political disputes." This same source further elaborated upon the rationale, remarking candidly, "The connection to the 2018 nuptials remains a significant piece of our historical archive, certainly, but it emphatically does not represent the direction of our future endeavors." The pervasive trend of calculated distancing reached its zenith, or perhaps its most tangible manifestation, when Balmain reportedly took the drastic step of canceling an already scheduled digital promotional event that had been planned to feature an in-depth, substantive conversation between the celebrated creative director Olivier Rousteing and the Duchess herself. This particular project, which was centered thematically around the concept of digital feminism, was abruptly scrapped only 4 short days before it was scheduled to be filmed. An official deeply involved in the decision-making process pointed to the sheer magnitude of the inherent danger, explaining with stark clarity, "Every single dialogue invariably devolves into an exhaustive list of her grievances rather than remaining a proper discussion concerning the clothing and artistry," the executive explained. "Here, in the storied city of Paris, our entire enterprise is dedicated to the creation and dissemination of dreams. Meghan, by contrast, consistently deals in conflict. Those two fundamentally disparate elements are, regrettably, entirely incompatible. Concealed behind the shimmering, opulent tapestry that unfurls during every grand fashion week spectacle resides an exceedingly complex and finely woven matrix composed of media strategists, dedicated representatives, and the preeminent stylists who function as the unyielding custodians of the coveted front row seating arrangements. By the time the calendar pages had turned to the middle segment of February, in the year 2026, the very mention of the name Meghan had transmuted into something resembling an automatic alert, a cautionary flag flashing within the confidential databases maintained by these industry gatekeepers. A highly respected European stylist, who had previously engaged in a significant collaborative endeavor with Meghan on a major publication project that took place during the course of 2019, offered a candid assessment of the prevailing atmosphere, albeit under the strict condition of absolute anonymity. The immediate instant her appellation is introduced into a conversation with any established fashion label these days, there ensues an extended, noticeable pause which is invariably succeeded by an exceedingly courteous, yet firm, deflection toward an entirely different subject matter. That, to those initiated, serves as the universal, unspoken industry directive signifying, it is imperative that this particular topic not be broached again. We are observing a meticulously executed maneuver of professional disentanglement operating on a truly global magnitude. The tangible ramifications stemming from this pervasive commercial chill became undeniably conspicuous when the initial compilation of expected invitees for the esteemed Paris Fashion Week, an event scheduled to unfold across the dates spanning the 4th through the 11th of March in the year 2026, was circulated amongst the select circle of media luminaries. Meghan Markle, an individual who formerly held privileged placement immediately adjacent to the world's most influential editorial figures, was conspicuously absent from every listing. Her presence was nowhere to be catalogued among the dignitaries seated at the forefront of the Dior presentations. Furthermore, she could not be located within the closely guarded backstage environments of Schiaparelli. Critically, her name was entirely missing from the meticulously curated guest manifests for the most exclusive and prestigious gatherings held following the runway shows, such as those traditionally hosted at l'Avenue. For a public figure whose entire professional edifice is constructed upon the tangible value of access, visibility, and the perception of being intimately connected, this profound relegation represented an alarming and precipitous descent in her established standing. Notwithstanding the rapidly intensifying atmospheric freeze surrounding her profile, the dedicated administrative contingent representing Meghan at the Archwell enterprise did not resign themselves to inaction. Thorough inquiries and investigative efforts suggest that her appointed public relations consultancy, known as Elmer Strategies, initiated a final, perhaps even desperate, campaign to recalibrate and salvage her public perception sometime between the 8th and the 10th of February. Reports indicate that they proposed an array of 5 distinct strategic narratives designed to frame a narrative of positive reconciliation to several major international news organizations. These proposals included the ambitious securing of a digital cover feature centered on the theme of sustainable, cutting-edge high fashion, the arrangement of a highly sought-after podcast engagement featuring a collaboration with the renowned designer Stella McCartney, and even the submission of a formal request for an invitation to deliver a prestigious TED Talk under the proposed title, Reclaiming Creative Space. The response emanating from the established world of high-end publishing proved to be just as thoroughly chilled and unresponsive as the reception from the venerable fashion houses. An editor holding a senior position at a highly regarded French periodical offered a sober reflection, stating plainly, "Our critical assessment is not rooted in any judgment concerning her personal or political convictions. Rather, we are evaluating what we perceive as an inherent inclination toward generating unnecessary upheaval. The moment she enters any sophisticated environment, there is an immediate and observable depletion of the existing positive energy. The very essence of high fashion demands that the artistry of the garment itself must perpetually serve as the central protagonist of the narrative. In her presence, however, the perpetual protagonist invariably becomes the ensuing conflict or disagreement. Within the sphere of French journalism, the tone of coverage progressively shifted from one of detached interest to overt disapproval. For instance, the venerable publication Le Figaro disseminated a critical fashion commentary bearing a headline that translated directly to signify, "The profound quiet of Chanel," a statement more potent than any spoken declaration. Even the French iteration of Vanity Fair, an outlet that had previously positioned itself as a steadfast champion of the Duchess's sartorial choices, released an analytical piece asserting that she had fundamentally confused the fleeting thrill of disruption with the enduring substance of genuine authority, issuing a clear warning to its readership that the rarefied atmosphere of high fashion simply does not bend its established protocols to accommodate the demands of any single individual's ego. The widespread commercial and social paralysis that defined the entirety of 2026 served to illuminate a fundamental, unyielding truth regarding the architecture of genuine influence. While the celebrity ecosystem prevalent throughout the United States often flourishes and gains momentum through sheer volume of noise and the ephemeral nature of viral moments, the established fashion aristocracy of Europe draws its profound strength from an entirely different foundation. A reverence for ancestry, a deep-seated commitment to caution, and the formidable, almost impregnable power inherent in the single, definitive word, no. By collectively and firmly closing their ornate doors, the venerable fashion establishments of Paris were enacting a gesture far exceeding the mere slighting of a single, high-spending client. They were actively engaged in the essential act of safeguarding an entire, carefully preserved cultural ethos. As one seasoned veteran of this highly specialized trade eloquently summarized the situation, within this particular realm, invitations are extended with an almost imperceptible quietude, but when those same doors are deliberately and forcefully shut, the resulting reverberation echoes across the industry for an exceptionally long duration. By the time the calendar reached the middle of February of that year, every significant portal in Paris had definitively produced that resonant sound, leaving the Duchess positioned outside a majestic fortress whose command she had once confidently presumed to possess. Be sure to maintain your subscription to our channel so that you may remain fully apprised of the subsequent developments unfolding within this ongoing narrative. As the imposing, heavy portals of Chanel were firmly bolted shut, and the entirety of the city of Paris, mirroring that decisive action, chose to draw its own curtains and cease outward activity, it is recorded that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, did not retreat into the shadows of obscurity or silence. Instead, drawing upon the intelligence gleaned from numerous individuals privy to the inner workings of her circle, she immediately pivoted back toward those familiar mechanisms that had previously proven efficacious in navigating her public life: the deployment of intricate legal stratagems, the circulation of meticulously crafted, clandestine public relations memoranda, and the calculated, strategic deployment of her personal narrative as a potent source of influence. Yet, for the very first occasion in the entirety of her tenure as a figure commanding public attention, these well-honed instruments proved entirely incapable of penetrating the formidable, thick stone bulwarks erected by the venerable fashion establishment. Subsequently, on the 8th day of February in the year 2026, a mere 24 hours having elapsed since the tense encounter that transpired in Beverly Hills, the counsel who had long served as Meghan's legal representative, known to us here as Jonathan Y., reportedly convened an urgent, high-stakes conference call with the most senior partners at Lehane & O'Donnell, a preeminent legal institution situated in the bustling metropolis of New York. The fundamental objective driving this clandestine gathering was to thoroughly investigate the feasibility of initiating a formal legal action, predicated upon claims of defamation or discriminatory treatment, to be levied against the House of Chanel for the perceived detriment inflicted upon her public standing. The meticulously detailed internal blueprint for this endeavor, which had been formally designated with the evocative code name Project Salvage, sought to ingeniously reposition the incident of denied entry as a clear and actionable violation of the tenets enshrined within the Unruh Civil Rights Act. Nevertheless, this meticulously prepared legal thrust was summarily extinguished before it ever had the remotest chance of being presented before the bench of any presiding judge. A consortium of seasoned legal minds, among them a distinguished jurist formerly serving on the California Superior Court, subjected the proposed legal arguments to rigorous scrutiny, ultimately dismissing them in unison as nothing more than mere legal fantasies, asserting unequivocally that no established statute compels a privately operated, exclusive fashion institution to actively maintain an ongoing, cordial association with any given public personality. By the 10th day of February, the formal planning stages for the anticipated lawsuit were quietly relegated to the archives. Yet the simmering conflict within the media sphere was only just beginning its escalation. Confronted by the unyielding rigidity of the judicial framework, the team advising Meghan initiated what those intimately acquainted with their methods term the managed leak. Precisely at 17 minutes past 11 in the morning on the 9th day of February, an internal electronic missive originating from Nadia Campbell, the director of communications at Archwell, was disseminated with notable force to a carefully curated list comprising more than 40 influential figures within the upper echelons of the media landscape. The subject line of this strategically timed communication was pointedly framed, an ongoing pattern, women of color in luxury spaces. The body of the electronic mail sought to deftly recast the entire Chanel episode as merely one component within a much broader, more systemic narrative concerning exclusionary practices and entrenched gatekeeping within elite sectors. It deliberately resurrected the documented history of friction Meghan had experienced with the British print media and subtly insinuated that the sudden, pronounced coolness emanating from the fashion industry was, in fact, rooted in veiled and deeply ingrained forms of prejudice. While the communiqué deliberately abstained from explicitly mentioning the name Chanel, the intended recipient and subject of the critique were universally understood. This constituted a deliberate maneuver to weaponize the contemporary discourse surrounding social justice against a brand that traditionally and fiercely prides itself on maintaining an elevated position entirely above the vicissitudes of political contention. The resulting fallout, however, proved to be an unmitigated catastrophe for the public image cultivated by Archewell. In stark contrast to previous years when such narratives were often embraced and amplified by journalistic outlets, the prevailing sentiment across the media in 2026 was characterized by a palpable, shared weariness. Out of the vast number of media professionals who were contacted, only a single, relatively minor digital publication offered a piece sympathetic to their cause. The remainder of the influential bodies, spanning from esteemed online magazines like The Cut to the venerable pages of Vogue, elected to offer absolutely no acknowledgement whatsoever. Within the sequestered confines of the Sussex residence nestled in Montecito, the atmosphere was reportedly one of sheer, unadulterated alarm. An individual who subsequently resigned from their post on the 10th of February disclosed that the working environment within the household had devolved into a state of disarray and escalating frenzy. It is alleged that Meghan herself adamantly directed her staff to intensify their efforts to promote the charitable dimensions of their work, insisting they remind the world of everything she had endured. Nevertheless, the broader public seemed utterly unmoved, displaying a distinct lack of appetite for the established narrative. In a piece of correspondence from WhatsApp that regrettably found its way into the public domain, a senior advisor offered a stark warning, stating, "We are palpably losing the interest of the collective room. The more intensely we emphasize the narrative of struggle, the greater the distance that the major brands place between themselves and us." The ultimate and most decisively damaging blow originated from within the very heart of the industry itself. Late on the evening of the 10th of February, a confidential electronic mail, originally dispatched by Bruno Pavlovsky, the president of Chanel's prestigious fashion division, was illicitly shared without authorization across a private server exclusively reserved for communications among industry insiders. The content of this message, which had been penned weeks earlier on the 28th of January, long preceding the unfortunate incident on Rodeo Drive, served to articulate the fashion house's position with crystalline clarity. It plainly stated, "There exist crucial junctures when maintaining a resolute silence serves the interests of the house far more effectively than issuing any statement whatsoever. We cannot reasonably be expected to assume the mantle of controversy or chaos simply to accommodate the temporary demands of a celebrity figure. The ultimate determination regarding M. Markle was fundamentally a matter of strategic alignment and business necessity, wholly divorced from any subjective emotional considerations." The unfortunate exposure of the contents of the Pavlovsky message served as the definitive, unmistakable indication that the highly exclusive and meticulously guarded gates of the world of high fashion had been firmly and irrevocably locked against the Duchess. This single event precipitated a dramatic shift in perception, instantly transforming Meghan, in the estimation of every significant marketing consortium operating across the entirety of Europe, from a figure deserving of sympathy into a demonstrable liability, a genuine problem demanding immediate mitigation. As the days progressed through the middle portion of that very week, the most esteemed and well-regarded public relations establishments situated in the bustling metropolises of New York and the sophisticated avenues of Paris began the meticulous process of inscribing the Duchess's name onto their most stringent, do-not-book registries, a clear signal of professional ostracization. One particularly high-ranking executive, holding a position of considerable influence within a premier agency, articulated the situation with unvarnished candor during a private exchange within a confidential work-related digital forum, stating plainly, "She no longer possesses the capability to drive the sale of merchandise. Her entire impact now seems solely directed toward propelling the news cycle in an undesirable, negative trajectory." When the gentle light of dawn finally illuminated the 11th day of February, the Duchess found herself enveloped in a profound solitude, an isolation unlike any she had previously encountered in her life. Her carefully orchestrated legal challenges had proven entirely ineffectual. Her attempts at strategic media disclosures had inadvertently inflicted far greater detriment than any potential benefit, and her elevated status within the circles that dictate prevailing trends and aesthetic sensibilities had utterly evaporated. She had exerted considerable effort in attempting to forcefully breach the sacred confines of that elite establishment, yet in her ambition, she had overlooked the most cardinal, unwritten decree of the highest echelons. In a realm where the coveted invitation functions as the sole currency of worth, those individuals who resort to aggressively forcing entry are almost invariably destined to be denied the privilege of remaining within. The comprehensive assessments rendered by various investigative sources were startlingly conclusive. Meghan Markle was no longer engaged in a contest to secure a desirable seat at a major runway presentation. Instead, she was locked in a desperate, existential struggle for the very continuation of her professional viability within an industry that had reached a unified and resounding consensus that it was unequivocally finished with the disruptive noise she generated. The ensuing quietude that descended was far more substantial than a mere absence of conversation. It was the palpable sound marking the deliberate, calculated movement of a globally recognized, historic brand pivoting its focus toward entirely different avenues of engagement. By the 11th day of February in the year 2026, precisely 4 days subsequent to the moment the celebrated portals of the venerable House of Chanel were conspicuously closed to her on the prestigious Rodeo Drive, the entire nature of the conflict had fundamentally transformed, evolving from a mere skirmish over access to high fashion into a frantic, all-encompassing battle for her enduring relevance within the broader cultural landscape. The repercussions stemming from this comprehensive global blacklisting extended far beyond the realm of couture and expensive garments. It represented a total systemic collapse that placed the entirety of the Sussex's burgeoning business enterprise under an immediate and severe threat. Within the hushed, exquisitely manicured enclaves of Montecito and the gleaming, contemporary corporate headquarters scattered throughout Hollywood, the gravity of the situation was being absorbed with a chilling, almost terrifying clarity. The Duchess was no longer viewed as an asset bringing value. Rather, she had become a potent, living cautionary tale intended for the instruction of others. According to intelligence shared by senior executives at several major streaming and video content services, the damage inflicted by the repercussions of the Chanel episode struck their pipeline of pending contractual agreements with the force of an overwhelming tidal wave. Archwell Productions, it was reliably reported, had been positioned at the absolute final juncture of finalizing an enormously significant agreement intended to produce a prestigious documentary series meticulously exploring the intricate symbiosis between the lineage of royalty and the evolution of global sartorial expression. That particular ambitious undertaking is now being summarily dismissed as definitively dead by at least one executive source. The explicit rationale provided for this abrupt termination was not rooted in any defect within the narrative concept itself, but rather in an irremediable and deeply damaging shift in the public perception surrounding the principal subject. No established, venerable brand, particularly those anchoring the rarefied atmosphere of the luxury sector, evinced any desire to become tethered, even tangentially, to an individual whose defining narrative had now devolved into one characterized primarily by professional rejection from the very industry she sought to conquer. A similarly pronounced cooling of professional camaraderie and personal association manifested itself at the loftiest tiers of the technology sector, particularly within the innovative ecosystem of Silicon Valley. Comprehensive plans for the development of a brand new, high-profile podcast venture were indefinitely suspended after 3 major, influential sponsors precipitously withdrew their committed backing within a span of 48 hours following the significant public events that transpired in Beverly Hills. The internal justification communicated to the team members directly involved in the project was brutally direct. Meghan had regrettably crossed the threshold into being considered brand toxic. One seasoned marketing professional offered a concise assessment, noting that she had effectively forfeited the ability to captivate the discerning consumer base that truly dictated market success. Instead of fostering an atmosphere of aspiration and inspiration among potential buyers, her public persona now served only to generate headlines concerning litigious disputes and internal conflict. Precisely the two elements that large, risk-averse corporations actively endeavor to avoid at all costs. Even the celebrated social constellations of California, which had previously embraced the royal arrivals with such enthusiastic warmth and open arms, had begun to subtly but distinctly contract and distance themselves. Residents of the exclusive Montecito community, speaking only in the strictest confidence, described a palpable and rapidly escalating tension permeating the local atmosphere. Invitations to the most exclusive charitable galas, those gatherings that fundamentally orchestrate the social calendar of the state's elite, have become exceedingly rare occurrences. Furthermore, those media personalities who had historically served as her most vocal and steadfast champions, such as the highly recognizable figures of Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King, have maintained an unnerving and conspicuous silence throughout this entire period of professional adversity. As one long-time local observer succinctly summarized the collective sentiment, the industry, speaking with a single, calm and unified voice, has collectively determined that this particular experiment has reached its unavoidable and final conclusion. Perhaps the most astonishing transformation, however, is the unfolding situation within the very confines of the Sussex's residence. Individuals situated intimately within the circle of the family have shared that Prince Harry has begun engaging in discreet, clandestine telephone conversations, endeavoring to ascertain the feasibility of regaining some form of involvement within London's sphere of activity. It must be clearly understood that this envisioned re-entry would not constitute a resumption of his former status as a senior working royal devoted to the service of the crown. Rather, it is being framed as a more subdued, a quiet return, centered primarily upon his enduring commitment to his established charitable endeavors, operating largely shielded from the intense glare of public scrutiny. Alas, the response emanating from the United Kingdom has reportedly been exceedingly resolute and unyielding. The pathway, any potential route back for the Duke, is said to hinge entirely upon a singular, immutable condition, as conveyed by the respective offices of Princess and Lady Louise Windsor. The Duchess, it is stipulated, cannot be included in any such arrangement. One individual employed within the machinery of the royal household articulated the position with stark clarity. The family remains most willing to consider possibilities concerning the son, but they have reached a definitive endpoint regarding the associated theatrics and turmoil. There is simply no path allowing for the reintegration of both individuals. The choice now stands starkly defined. It is a decision between his inherited duty and the narrative they have diligently sought to construct and promote while residing in California. Prince Harry, reportedly deeply unsettled and profoundly affected by the public humiliation inflicted upon his wife by a commercial entity he once held in the highest esteem, positioning it among the absolute zenith of global enterprises, is understood to be caught within a difficult impasse. He witnessed the collective pretense cease on the 7th day of February, an occasion that revealed to him the protective barriers surrounding the Sussex brand to be significantly more fragile than his prior estimations had ever suggested. Furthermore, the financial underpinning of their endeavors is demonstrably deteriorating. The Archwell Foundation has registered a precipitous decline in the volume of financial contributions received, a troubling trend exacerbated by the withdrawal of support from two substantial benefactors. Should you wish, I could certainly undertake a detailed examination of how this developing state of affairs might consequently affect the ongoing trajectory and viability of contemporary celebrity brand collaborations.